Are you ready for your final bravada? Yes, of course you are. Marvellous. Well, speaking for the first time at the Kino Teatre, but this is the second time that I have heard this wonderful bavard. Can we please give a huge Kino Teatre Ba welcome to Anthony Grant.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and hello. Imagine writing to every person, every famous person that formed a backdrop to your childhood. So every artist, every author, every actor, every politician, every comedian, every musician. Writing to them all and asking them to come to your bedroom because you've got a nice camera and you'd like to take a photograph of them. You don't have a studio, you don't have any lights, you don't really have much film, and you don't really know how to work the camera, but would they like to come anyway? Imagine writing that letter to all of those people, and imagine if they all said yes. Well, that's what happened to me, and this is the story of why they said yes, and what happened when they got to my bedroom, and why I asked them in the first place. And I'll also explain at one point the curious title. Excuse me, my lips dry up when I'm nervous. Okay, I'd like to introduce you first off to my dad. That was him in Eastbourne, where he was born in the 1920s. And his hair tells it all. He was a fantastically effusive and interested person. He was fascinated by things around him from a young age. He wanted to know how everything worked. His father was an electrician. He put all the electrics in all the hotels along the Eastbourne seafront in the 20s. And his grandfather was a head gardener. So he was very interested in natural phenomena as well as mechanical objects, electrical things. And all through his life, he took things to pieces, put them back together again. When he was a teenager or young boy coming up into the Second World War in Eastbourne, one of his pastimes was to go out after an air raid and find unexploded incendiary bombs and unscrew them and take the middle out and swap them at school. Thank you. So he was that kind of a person. Didn't swap stamps, he swapped incendiary bombs. He was young enough, lucky enough to not have to fight in the war, but he left school halfway through the war and he decided that he wanted to become a dentist. And all his life he said to me that it was the mix of science and artistry that drew him towards wanting to be a dentist. It was a perfect mix. He said it was a very artistic occupation. Rebuilding. He was called up for his national service and he was sent up to Scotland to do the fearful teeth of the fearful Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders. And this is him up in Scotland. And while there, he met and fell in love with this young lady who became my mum, and they were the great love of each other's lives, the rest of their lives. Came back down to London with her, and he set up his practice in a house which he bought for £2,000 opposite the Victoria and Albert Museum, and it had 20 rooms in it, which he couldn't afford to heat, and he lived in one and slept on the floor and had his own little tiny dental practice in one of those rooms. I appeared a few years later, and what I remember of my youth was that I was constantly being encouraged to explore. Every day you had to find the joy and the pleasure and the fun and the excitement of every day. And this was never based on things that cost lots of money. This was always based on small things in life that could bring immense pleasure, taking things apart, creating things, laughing about things, laughing together about things. I became this child that loved staring. And this is a picture of me. If I could get my hands on binoculars or a telescope or anything, or I could just sit and stare at people. I was incredibly shy and I hate being looked at, and I still hate being looked at, but I love looking at people and observing them. And here I am, and I can remember this. I remember in my head there, I was imagining all sorts of adventures on this ship, and I was doing things and landing on a parachute and all sorts of things on this boat at the time. having these imaginary goings on in my head, but always staring at things. One day, my father gave me a old thing that he'd had as a child, which was a pedal-driven jigsaw. And here we are. You have to pedal away at the bottom here, and there's a little fret saw that goes up and down here. And on flat pieces of hardboard, you could cut them out and make exciting jigsaws out of them. But my father said, well, they're not. They're just jigsaw flat pieces of wood. We need to make them more exciting. Now, he was really interested in photography. Although, as I say, he was a dentist, but he was mad about cameras. And every month, there I am again, making the jigsaws. You can see them here. Every month, this magazine used to arrive, and it would arrive at the bottom of the letterbox, and his bedroom was at the top. And I used to run up with the magazines and flick through it all the way as I was going upstairs. And you can see the dates here. This is 1960s. And this is when photography, and in fact the world, was bursting into colour. I was just young enough to really enjoy the fact that we lived quite near the King's Road, and everything just burst into excitement and colour, including the styles of photography. Photography burst open with people like, obviously, David Bailey, and the rest of that crew of photographers of the time. And of course, I loved this magazine because it was the only chance I got every month to see a bit of a naked woman every now and again as I ran up to my parents' bedroom. But also, I kind of appreciated that there was some amazing images in these magazines as well. One advert was for a particularly wonderful camera called the Rolleiflex, and this was the be-all and end-all of cameras of its day. There were copies in every country in the world, but nobody could copy the original, wonderful German Rolleiflex. And my dad came home in 1963, I think, very proud of his new Rolleiflex, and actually I took this picture of him. He obviously just asked me to press a button on something. And I remember this camera all through my childhood, because this camera, we were scrubbed and cleaned up, and big hot lights were put on us, and we were made to pose. Then we would run down to a little dark room that he'd made under the stairs to develop the pictures. And that whole scenario was something that would stick with me for the rest of my life. But he said, okay, you've made your jigsaws, they're not that exciting, so every time he got a new camera, we had to do something for the new camera. Things like this. We'd go down to his surgery, and he'd say, bring all the stupid things you can find in the house, because we want to test out my new camera. And so here I am being hammered and chiseled by a top South Kensington dentist while my sister irons the side of my face here. And of course we had to do all different variations of this. Sometimes she was the patient and I was the young glamorous nurse. And my dad's hook here is from my mum's sort of baking device thing, and his drill here. And so this was very typical of an afternoon spent with my dad. There are things everywhere that remind me of, he built this intercom system so that he could talk to every room in the house. Over here, this black object is the cocktail cabinet that would open up for the last patient of the day, and who would insist that they had a whiskey and soda on, with him before they left. And I'm actually less scared of these things than I am of the things that actually took place with these objects here. My dad built his original surgery by hand, like Heath Robinson. The drill was pedal-driven. You can imagine how awful that was. The spittoon was a sweetie jar with a vacuum cleaner on it. And I always remember that the light was a car headlamp. So when I see the Lucas headlamps, my teeth jiggle, because I had to stare at that while having my teeth done. And some of you are old enough to remember that there were no injections in those days. They just drilled until you couldn't stand it anymore. So that was that. So then I got given my first camera, and ladies, please control yourselves for this one. My first camera was an Instamatic, which was a big brick of a camera, and you used to put flashbulbs on the top that melted when you took a picture, and you had 4, and you turned them round, and by the time you'd taken 4 pictures, you had this big glob of melted plastic on the top of your camera. So I started photographing anything and absolutely everything, and I found that I was somebody who I didn't experience life as it happened, but I loved looking back at pictures, and then I'd see things that had happened that I'd missed, and I'd see them in photographs. And I've spoken to other people who are painters or writers who make films, and they say the same thing, is that they live vicariously through what they create, sometimes more intensely than what's actually happening in front of them. But I used to take photos of anything and everything, like ask my parents to put my pants on their head and take portraits of them and things like that. So I enjoyed the camera as a device for being ridiculous. And these are the days when the family would sit around the TV together and we would watch silly programs together, and everyone would laugh together. And I always remembered that later on in my life, that has now largely vanished from our experiences of life. And I was half expected to take over the dental practice that my dad had built up for 25 years. It was a wonderful practice. It had fabulous patients. There was a Doctor Who, there was Dylan Thomas's ex-wife, there was the Russian sort of Secret Service used to come. All these people used to come to the house to have their teeth done. But I took science A-levels thinking I might take it over. It wasn't my idea. And I failed dismally because I was no good at science, didn't understand a word of any of it. And I should have really done art. And in fact, when I failed everything, my dad took it on the chin and said, well, you love drawing and painting, so maybe art school is the thing for you. And he drove me to Hornsey, where I had an interview, and I got into Hornsey. And then I got into St Martin's, and I turned into an art student. And it was when I was an art student that something terrible happened. My father at age 55 suddenly died, and I was only 19. And this wonderful, exciting, adventurous, mad, wonderful family life just stopped. Curtains came down. I saw my mother destroyed and distraught, and I just did nothing. I just went numb. I didn't react at all. And I guess what you might call unprocessed grief. And that's another whole million stories. But the upshot is that at its very lowest point, when I would walk out into traffic, find myself on the other side of the road, I don't know how I got there, I didn't eat, I couldn't see the point of sleep. Because these things come back to bite you if you don't let them out. But I didn't know that at the time. At the very lowest point, three things happened which I now see started what the talk is actually going to be about. The first thing was, late one night, the television was on, and in those days, if you didn't have a TV Times, or you hadn't caught the titles at the beginning, you didn't know what you were watching, and you couldn't find out. This came on, and it was the most wonderful thing. I was totally engrossed. Some of you will recognise it. It's a film called Blow Up. It's a piece of 1960s, absolute nonsense, but it's an absolutely brilliant film. And it's David Hemmings, loosely based on the actual David Bailey. And he has all sorts of adventures, and is in this wonderful place. And I looked down, and I was wearing a light blue shirt, white trousers, black shoes, a black belt, and a watch, and I had sort of floppy-ish hair. And I looked at myself, and I was the person that was on the television in front of me. And I wanted to be him so much the next day, because the film just looked like it was so much fun driving around London in an open-top Bentley, taking pictures of wonderful girls and having adventures. And I got so obsessed that I got a little cardboard wine box the next day, and I built my own dream studio inside a little tiny wooden cardboard box. And this was a studio I wanted to live in. This is tiny. There's my camera. And there's pictures of Brigitte Bardot and Albert Camus. And when I've taken pictures of naked girls, I'm going to run up here and crash out on this bed and read these magazines. And I've got an old-fashioned phone and a desk. And I built all this stuff and just dreamt of living in this box and being a photographer like David Hemmings. On one particularly bleak day, because I used to disappear into the dark rooms at St Martin's and nobody knew where I was, and I was just wanted to be alone in the dark, in the red light, teaching myself how to process films and not talking to anyone. And one day I came out into the light and I saw a commotion on the other side of the road, and Andy Warhol was in the shop opposite. And so I thought, I had my father's camera with me, and I went in there. And I made my way to the front, and I took 36 pictures of Andy Warhol, and he signed a book for me. And I thought, well, that's easy. Photographing famous people is really easy, and it's really fun, and I don't have to go to art school. So the next day I went back to St Martin's, and I went to the office to tell them I was leaving, and I didn't realise they'd already called me up to the office to throw me out, because they'd never know where I was. So whether I was thrown out or I left, it's up to you. The third thing that happened was, after I was thrown out or left, I got a job in a hospital late at night in an accident department. And one night, I just happened to open a newspaper, and there was this article about how the government was not paying for the scanner that was needed at the Royal Marsden Cancer Hospital, and that's where my dad had died. And there was outrage that everyone with cancer in the country was being sent to the Marsden, and they didn't have a scanner, and they weren't getting the money for it. So they appealed to the public to give them some money. Well, I wanted to be David Hemmings. I'd photographed Andy Warhol, and they needed some money, and all these things came together in my head, and I thought, there's something I need to do with this idea. I didn't think that clearly, but now looking back, that's what I was thinking. And I found my father's Rolleiflex in the bottom of a packing crate, because my mum had moved house from where we'd lived. She didn't want to live in that house anymore, and she'd moved to a tiny house in Chelsea, in which I was in an even tinier bedroom. And I found my father's Rolleiflex, and it's incredibly complicated if you don't know about cameras, so I taught myself how to use it. And it's a wonderful, wonderful, beautiful machine, and just holding it took me back to the days when he was holding it and taking pictures of us. And I realised I'd seen David Bailey using one, I'd seen all the great photographers using these, so I knew it was a really good camera. Well, I didn't really know much about cameras in those days. So I wrote letters. I wrote hundreds and hundreds of letters in longhand and a fountain pen to every person that I'd remembered my father watching on TV, or with my mum going to the theatre and seeing them, or reading books, or listening to their records, or he would be berating them in the newspapers like Harold Wilson, that stupid windbag, or what's this bloody Enoch Powell saying now? Anyone, it didn't matter if I liked them or not, just I wrote to them all and said, would you like to come to my bedroom? It's not very big, there's no lights, and but I'd like to use your portrait to do something for the Royal Marsden. And well, I threw my bed out, and I threw all the furniture out so that I'd have some room in the bedroom. So it was actually a bedroom, but I slept on the floor, and I painted it all white. And I just waited, and I said to everyone, oh, all these famous people are going to come to my bedroom, and everyone just thought I was having a nervous breakdown, which maybe I was. And one day, a postcard arrived, and it was this, and it said, many thanks, I'm no artist, but your project sounds most interesting. And it was from Patrick Moore, the great astronomer of the day. And I was so excited, I ran around showing everybody, look, I told you they'd all come. And my mum went, well, it's really lovely, but it doesn't actually say he's coming to see you. And I said, no, he is, he's going to come. And he did come, and I took this of him with the Rolleiflex. And he was huge, and he barely fitted in the room. And he was the most fantastic person to have first, because he was completely bonkers. And he talked about xylophone playing and how he'd mapped out the moon for the Apollo. They'd used his maps to land on the moon and all this stuff. And he was just mad, and it was such fun. And I thought, and I liked the picture, and I thought, I like doing this. I'm terribly shy, but I could hide behind writing letters, and I could hide behind a camera, and I could have a sort of wall between me and somebody so that I could enjoy them, but there was always a third thing there that we could look at to distract us. So I found that photography was the ideal thing for me. And then suddenly, all these letters kept coming, and phone calls, and in those days, it was so off the cuff. People would just ring up, or it was very informal. So I'd get letters like this from George Cole, the great Minder actor, any day next week, or sort of, dear Anthony, thanks, would 10:30 on July 27th be any good? Tony Benn. And all these people kept And of course, I'd cycled around London giving these letters out, wondering whether they would ever reach these people. I didn't know where to send them. So I would cycle past the House of Commons and say to a policeman, can you give this to Harold Wilson? Or I'd go to a stage door, can you give this to Glenda Jackson? And they go, anyway, they all seemed to get the letters and they all started to come round. And if they couldn't come to my bedroom, they'd invite me to their place. So I'd spend the day with Spike Milligan or Enoch. I had tea in the morning with Tony Benn and tea in the afternoon with Enoch Powell. And, or I spent a day with Henry Moore, sketching, just me and him and stuff. And anyone you can think of, really. So I would, if they couldn't come to me, I'd cycle around London with all my gear and go to their house and take pictures. And I learned that made a good cycle helmet. Anyway, so my first exhibition, which I was trying to raise some money for the Royal Marsden, obviously, and I realised that it cost a lot of money to put up an exhibition. Well, I didn't have a clue how to do it. And then I went to visit my grandmother because I remembered, my grandmother's house, because she'd actually died. But I went to her house and her greenhouse was falling apart. And I thought, that's good. So I took it to bits and I built my first exhibition where all the pictures were just the size of whatever window I'd used to make the frame. And I built a box, and people put money in the box, and I took the money each few days to the Marsden. And they did get their £1 million. I didn't raise £1 million, but they did get their £1 million, and what I'd done worked towards that. And then the next stage up was that I got my show at the Royal Court Theatre, which was around the corner from where I lived. And this was an amazing historic theatre where so many groundbreaking angry young men plays, all that stuff in the 50s. So it was really exciting to have stuff there. And then finally, well not finally, but the next one up was, I had my name in lights at the National Theatre, which was really good. And I was cycling on the other side when I saw that, and I nearly crashed into a bus and died, because I had to go back, because it kept going round in lights, and I had to wait to take that picture again. Then I wanted to do something bigger and better, because I thought, well, this is good. These people obviously like coming to my bedroom and they'll do things. So I said to them, who would you like to be if you weren't who you are? And of course they came up with insane ideas. But then I realized I had to actually take those photographs. Well, this is before Photoshop or anything like that. So I had to physically create the backgrounds in my bedroom and hire or buy or find and borrow costumes and wigs and everything to dress them up as that person. And so painting the sky was easy enough. But when, who was it? Nigel Hawthorne said he wanted to be the last man in the world and I need an atom bomb. No problem. So I painted an atom bomb in my tiny bedroom, and then I had to build a house that had exploded in front of that, which came later, or somebody wanted to be Aristotle, and I said, yeah, that's fine. So I built like a Greek temple at the end of the bedroom for that, and somebody else, I think it was Marjorie Proops or somebody, wanted to be the first person in the world, and they wanted to be in a swamp. So my bedroom was then filled with this huge swamp here at the beginning of, and you can see I'm making it at this end, and of course it meant that the door was here, so anyone who wanted to be photographed in this kind of thing had to get on their knees and climb underneath and pop up in the thing. And they were about 60, 70, 80, 90 years old, these people. And of course I had to test out my swamp. And then I found a place that hired out wigs, and they were fantastic wigs. Real hair, every single hair put in individually, and these wigs had been worn by Laurence Olivier and all these wonderful people. And they said, yeah, you can borrow them, but look after them, they're like religious objects. And another place that had fabulous costumes from every century ever. And I used to love coming home on the bus for these things, and then just walking around the house dressed in the things that these people were going to wear when they came to my house. And of course, the best of all was wearing dresses. I loved wearing medieval dresses, and something that's never left me. And so who came, and what did they do? Well, I haven't got time to go through them all, but the kind of people that did this and did things like this. Here's John Cleese getting ready to be Lady Jane Grey, and he said, I want the nastiest, cheapest nylon wig you can find, and the dress wouldn't do up, so it's all open at the back. Or Christopher Lee coming and doing his beard. He was descended from Charlemagne, and that's him in my sitting room making himself into Charlemagne. And in my bedroom I had created Chartres Cathedral, of course, for him to sit in. Or the day that I had to fatten up Joanna Lumley to be Henry VIII. And I shoved tissue paper in her mouth, and it kept dissolving, and I had to push more in her mouth. And she had a big belly and stuff. And that was fun. Or, the great Max Wall wanted to be King Canute. So yeah, fine, I built a sea, and I find a seagull, and you've just got to pop up, you're only 80 years old, climb underneath, pop up, and then I added a crown and everything. It looked much better than this when it was finished. These are just the background pictures. Or Jeremy Irons wants to be Van Gogh, took it terribly seriously. Here's a book of pictures, we had to get it absolutely right. That's my grandfather's pipe. That was a bandage I discovered had been around my mum's knee once, so I washed it and put that on his head. So that was fun. And some of them were really stupid, which was the best, like Mary Whitehouse's Boadicea. That was fun. So there's the Rolleiflex. Proof that I was there. And a fantastic hat I made for her, and she wouldn't wear it because it's going to ruin her hair. So she just looks like Mary Whitehouse. And then, a friend of mine had said, "Oh, you could try one of these things. It's a video camera." Well, I got the first ever video camera, and I put it in the corner of my room, and I just let it run, and I've got videos of things like. This is me with Felicity Kendall getting ready to do Delilah, and we're trying to work out what's the best way to do it. And this is a video. I can't show you the video tonight, but nobody has ever seen these videos, including the people that are in some of them. And or Julie Walters wanting to be Joan of Arc, and that's the light meter. And her reasoning, some people like Christopher Lee, it was because he was descended from Charlemagne, and he wore the ring of Charlemagne's crest, and it was all terribly intense. And she just said, "I've never worn a suit of armour, so I'd like to do that." So she did Joan of Arc, and the picture is absolutely stunning, the finished picture. And of course, you can imagine I had a lot of fun doing this. It used to be that I didn't realise what I'd done until they'd gone. And I go, I just pushing tissue paper in Joanna Lumley's mouth, and I didn't remember. And it was only hours later that I realised. And of course, things were really fun, like dressing Dudley Moore up as Queen Victoria. And this is all in my house, in my bedroom. So why did I call it another Omelette Mr. Gielgud? Well, that's not a very clear picture of this one, but anyway, he's in a tiny bedroom on a tiny chair right by the door, and my mum would insist, because she couldn't believe it, because the bell would go, and it was Glinda Jackson, or it was somebody at the door, so "Don't come in." And she'd say to me, "Those poor actors, they look so hungry," she said, and she'd feed them all with things. And she was Scottish, so she had to feed everybody. And like Max Wall came once, he said, have you got any Guinness and cigarettes? She said, "Do you want any?" He said, "Yes." "Have you got any Guinness and cigarettes?" She went, "Yes." And I saw her running down the street to Thresher's, and she came back, gave him Guinness, as if we already had Guinness and menthol cigarette. Anyway, I took this picture, which I really liked, and at the second I took it, thinking, that's really good, the door right by him opened and nearly hit him on the head. And my wonderful mum, who all through this was the support, who allowed her house to turn into this mad place, she poked her head in, she said, "Another omelette, Mr. Gielgud." And I thought, that's a really good title for a talk in 40 years' time. But she was amazing. And of course things went on, and then that's from about 10 years ago. A lot of my pictures were shown at the National. Lots of the people who are still alive, sadly a lot of them weren't, they came to see it, supported me and everything. Why did I ever do this? It's because I lost someone to support me, someone to talk about boy stuff, dad stuff. I never had any of that from when I was 19. But before that, I had the most incredible time, but I was never an adult with my dad. And so I use his camera, because every time I click that camera, it connects me to something between us. That's all I've got left. And so I've used that camera to raise money for the Royal Marsden. And it's not a fundraising talk, but if any of you ever have a spare £10 or anything, Google the Royal Marsden and send it, because they're at the forefront of fighting this awful disease, which at the time of me taking those pictures was 1 in 5 people. It's now 1 in 3 people. So more people get it, but the treatments are better. So it's quite a weird setup. So if you ever want to support the Royal Marsden, that would be amazing. Now, you can imagine that some of the stories behind some of those pictures, and the actual pictures I didn't even show you tonight, are quite interesting. So I've started this thing called Confessions of a Serial Photographer, and it's 40 years of shooting famous faces. And so if you'd like to hear stories about anyone there, and loads more, and I can assure you they are quite colourful stories. I am going to start giving weekly talks, and I'll split it into artists and politicians and all the various things. And I did one last week in Eastbourne on 10 incredible women that I'd photographed, from Jane Goodall to Germaine Greer to Nigella Lawson when she was 19, to Darcy Bussell, to all these ones, Tracy Edwards sailing around the world. So I'm giving talks like that. If you've got your phone on you or anything like that, if you want to take that thing, if you email me and say, oh, I was at the Bavard, I'll put you on the mailing list. And when I finally decide where in St Leonard's I'm going to give my talks, I'll send out a thing to anybody who's taken that tonight. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
That was real. Yeah, it's just water. I know. It is just water.
Thank you.
Anthony Grant, wasn't that sensational? Did you enjoy that? It should be on.
It is on.
It is on, yeah.